Welcome to Headline News. This is Maria Han. Pompeo and Miles Yu in agreeance that the CCP leaked the virus and will be held accountable. On Tuesday, February 23rd, former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former State Department Chief China Advisor Miles Yu jointly published an article in the Wall Street Journal titled, "China's Reckless Labs Put the World at Risk," condemning the Chinese Communist Party for leaking a virus that endangered the world and arguing that the world must hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable. In their article, they make it clear that the coronavirus, which has harmed the whole world, was leaked from Wuhan, and the costs and the risks to world health are enormous. They argue that the world cannot tolerate the CCP continuing in this way. Quote, "The world must hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable and punish Beijing if it fails to uphold global biosafety standards, including basic transparency requirements." They argue that while the Chinese Communist Party has been obsessed with researching viruses in recent years, it has not paid attention to laboratory biosafety regulations. According to the article, the CCP's army of scientists claim to have discovered almost 2,000 new viruses in a little over a decade. This number equals the total number of viruses discovered worldwide in the past 200 years. The CCP's negligence on biosafety is troubling. They said that both parties in the U.S. have questions about China's Wuhan Institute of Virology, and a large amount of circumstantial evidence also shows that the source of the CCP virus is this Wuhan virus lab. They also mentioned that in 2018, the State Department had received 2 reports of biosafety problems at the Wuhan virus lab. Yuan Zhiming, the director of the WIV's Biosafety Level 4 lab, also admitted that Chinese biology labs generally lacked operational technical support and professional instructions, among other problems. In addition, according to some Chinese bloggers, animals with the virus used in experiments were sent to the market for sale. Yuan warned, "The biosafety laboratory is a double-edged sword. It can be used for the benefit of humanity, but can also lead to a disaster." Pompeo and Miles Yu argue that the CCP has a moral and legal obligation to take biosafety seriously, yet the party has refused to allow international experts to visit and monitor the Wuhan lab. The CCP has ordered the destruction of patient virus samples from the early stages of the outbreak, banned the release of critical data, forced journalists, doctors, and scientists into silence, and obstructed the investigation by a team of WHO experts. Quote, "Beijing doesn't want the world to know the true origin of the coronavirus and its serious biosafety lapses," they wrote. "The Chinese Communist Party's recklessness has already cost the world too much, and its obfuscation guarantees this won't be the last such tragedy." Pompeo and Miles Yu concluded by stating in all seriousness that the Chinese Communist Party must make changes and should disclose its biosafety system to correct its mistakes and curb its ambitions. Quote, "Lives and livelihoods across the world are on the line. We all have a responsibility to make sure that the Chinese Communist Party isn't given a free pass." After leaving his post as Secretary of State in January, Pompeo joined the Hudson Institute, a conservative Washington think tank, along with Miles Yu. Pompeo is one of the most hardline hawks in the Trump administration against the Chinese Communist Party, and Miles Yu, who understood the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, was his most powerful assistant. Biden promises to rescue 2 Canadian hostages during U.S. Canada summit. On February 23rd, U.S. President Joe Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held a video conference in which they discussed how to deal with the pandemic, the competition with China, and other issues. Biden also promised to rescue 2 Canadians arrested by the Chinese Communist Party. This is the first bilateral video conference with a foreign head of state since Biden's inauguration, and Trudeau is the first foreign head of state to speak to Biden on the phone since Biden took office. The two sides also discussed supply chains in the face of the pandemic, economic recovery, climate change, refugees and migration, and the global issues for democratic values and the strengthening of domestic democratic institutions. In a post-meeting press conference, Biden said the meeting was an opportunity for him and Trudeau to explore the U.S. Canada bilateral partnership to advance issues of concern in the Western Hemisphere and globally, including working together to better respond to China's competition and threats to interests and values, following last week's meeting of leaders of the G7. In his remarks, Trudeau thanked Biden for the assistance he will give Canada in securing the release of the two Canadians. He said, quote, "We're facing rough times, and we're not facing them alone. Canada and the United States are the closest of allies and the most important of trading partners." After Canada's capture of Huawei's CFO Meng Wanzhou in 2018, former Canadian diplomat Michael Kovrig and businessman Michael Spavor have been arrested and held by the Chinese Communist Party on espionage charges. Meng, who has been released on conditional bail, is free to reunite with her family or travel throughout much of Vancouver. Beijing's move is widely seen as hostage diplomacy to pressure Canada to release Meng. So far, the official response of Canada has been criticized as being too weak on the Chinese Communist Party, and Biden's ability to achieve the mission of rescuing the Canadian hostages has attracted international attention. WHO official predicts that the pandemic will end in early 2022. As countries around the world are implementing mass vaccination campaigns, the global pandemic seems to be showing signs of slowing down. On Sunday, February 21st, Hans Kluge, World Health Organization Regional Director for Europe, pointed out that COVID-19 is expected to end in early 2022. He predicted that the worst scenarios are now over. Kluge believed that the world now has a more comprehensive understanding of pandemic prevention than last year when COVID-19 first began to spread, and he thinks that the worst is over. He explained, "Although the pandemic will still be prevalent in 2021, it will be easier contained than in 2020. As a result, he predicted that the pandemic can be expected to end in early 2022. But Kluge also stressed that this is only a prediction. It is difficult for anyone to say exactly how the situation of the pandemic will develop. The virus will continue to exist around the world, but he believed that there will no longer be a need for the restrictions. We can be optimistic about the future and gradually return to normal life." Kluge also pointed out that mutations in viruses are normal. But because of the rapid spread of mutant viruses, WHO is closely monitoring the effectiveness of vaccines against the variants. He said the vaccines can be altered based on the new mutations if necessary. He thinks that the mutated strains of viruses will not make the virus uncontrollable, but it does put countries with a lack of medical resources under high pressure. He warned that we should still take the mutated viruses very seriously. In response to Kluge's insights, Commander of Taiwan's Central Epidemic Command Center, Chen Shicheng, said that in both developing and developed countries, 2022 is indeed the expectation for when COVID will end. But for countries that are economically behind, this remains to be seen. The Washington Post interviewed 8 experts last month about when the United States will return to normal life. The answer is that the United States will not be able to return to life as usual until the end of 2021. Also, when will the United States reach herd immunity? The experts concluded that generally 70% of the population needs to be immune to the virus, either by recovering from illness or by vaccination. The United States currently has a population of about 330 million people. It means that about 230 million people need to have been vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. Experts believe that the most optimistic estimate for the United States is that herd immunity will not be achieved until after this summer. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.